research topic focused on the Negro Leagues, the rise and fall of the Negro Leagues. And while I focus on the history, while I focus on the achievements of the Negro Leagues, I really try to answer what caused their decline and what did the rise and fall look like in local communities. And so I focus on Kansas City and Indianapolis within the paper to try to map the stories. If Rube Foster's goal was integration, did the leagues have to fail in order to actually succeed? There are many reasons why the Negro Leagues rose to prominence, but as research showed, there were several instances and reasons why the Negro Leagues were on shaky ground. Out of segregation and discrimination and during a Jim Crow America, the Negro Leagues gave rise to professional African American baseball players, professional owners, professional team managers, and also created an economic ecosystem, so to speak, in which the black community could thrive. It provided job opportunities for other league workers, for umpires, for bus drivers, and things. Also created a sense of pride within the African American community, allowed them to have sports heroes of their own to root for. Yes, there were the evils of segregation and discrimination. It created business opportunities for specifically African American owned businesses and culture to thrive. And districts like 18th and Vine in Kansas City, places like Indiana Avenue were places where Negro Leagues players would congregate before and after games. People in the community wanted to come out, and so these businesses were thriving as a result. And yes, the leagues eventually failed, but they failed at the hands of social progress and the march towards equality. I use several primary sources, population statistics in Kansas City and Indianapolis to show the impact of the increase in African Americans in those cities. Newspapers from Kansas City, the Kansas City Call, the Kansas City Advocate, the Kansas City Sun, newspapers from Indianapolis, the Indianapolis Recorder, the Indianapolis Freeman, to give me insight into the Negro Leagues in those local communities, and also African American newspapers like the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier. I also used marketing materials, used interview quotes from Negro League stars like Jackie Robinson. Quantitative and qualitative approach kind of all at once, using those statistics and numbers and tell a quantitative story, but using the interviews and the first-hand accounts to give it that qualitative approach as well. There were several secondary sources that helped my research. Janet Bruce Campbell's The Kansas City Monarchs, Champions of Black Baseball gave me an in-depth look at the operation of the Kansas City Monarchs, how they became a social institution in Kansas City. And Neil Langtot's Negro League Baseball, The Rise and Ruin of a Black Institution, Michael Lomax's Black Baseball Entrepreneurs, and Roberta Newman and Joel Nathan Rosen's Black Baseball, Black Business were all instrumental in informing my research. That the decline was caused by many, many things, not just integration. There was a lack of organization from the start. There were three separate leagues that eventually formed and took place: the Negro National League, the Eastern Colored League, and the Negro American League. And all of the time, these were competing. The travel conditions were terrible, long rides, hundreds of miles on broken down buses. Pay was not even close to the major leagues and what their white counterparts were receiving. Teams would raid each other's roster. Sometimes players would just leave and move to the leagues in Latin America. Integration was also an issue that led to its decline. You can't ignore that at all. When Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier, it opened the door for other African Americans to cross the line. Instead of looking at the Negro Leagues as a sense of pride or community building, it began to look to the African American press and the African American community as just a relic of Jim Crow. And so the relationship with the press shifted and helped foster the decline. White owners wouldn't pay much money for the services of African American players. Rickey and the Dodgers paid $0 to the Monarchs for Jackie Robinson. That hurt the financial bottom line of Negro League teams. While integration was now possible, not every player got to go over. Major League teams still instituted quotas, and so that hurt the number of African Americans that could come across to Major League Baseball. What these leagues did, the gains outweighed the losses. It opened doors, laid the foundation for future civil rights movements. It allowed for African Americans to join the middle class. It provided opportunity and progress within the African American community. It boosted the economic experience for black business. And so the Negro Leagues were an overall reflection of the African American experience. And while the leagues failed and folded, they may be looked at as an economic failure, yes, but the long-term benefits outweighs the cost. The goal of Rube Foster in 1920 was to create a league that was fully integrated. And so from the get-go, to achieve his main goal would mean the decline and closure of the Negro Leagues. And so yes, they eventually did that, and yes, they folded, and yes, there was shaky ground that the leagues were built upon, and there were structure issues and contract issues. But the ultimate goal was to finally close these things down anyway, because we had an integrated professional organization, and thus hopefully making progress to a more integrated society. And so to truly win, I think that the Negro Leagues ultimately had to lose.